Juz 28 starts with Mujadala, which opens with the discussion of the ruling of Dhihar, followed by speaking against secret meetings and consultations that isolate other people. Then continuing, Allah educates the Muslims about communal conduct and etiquettes. The surah gives instruction against close relationships with those who seek to ridicule the Prophet or harm the believers. The surah highlights the two parties in this life, the party of Shaitan and the party of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the people of Iman, verse 22. Hashr references the expulsion of Banu Nadir from Medina when they breached the treaty of peaceful coexistence, lists the superior qualities of the Muhajirin and the Ansar, followed by listing the qualities of the hypocrites. Allah then concludes the surah speaking of His divine attributes in verse 23 and His praise in 24. Mumtahina gives instructions to the believing men and women not to make close allies with those who are enemies to Islam. Then giving examples of Ibrahim alayhi salam, how he separated from his community and even his father because he believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the same time, there is also an instruction to the believer to act justly with people of other faiths. The command against friendship is only with people who fight the message of Islam. Saf instructs the Muslims to strive in his path and defend his message, to obey the messenger, to not be like those who had harmed Musa and Isa alayhim salam. There is also reference of how Isa alayhi salam foretold the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Then Allah talks about the best trade that believers make, which is sacrificing life and wealth for His sake in return for the reward in Jannah. The surah concludes with the encouragement to be like the true followers of Isa alayhi salam, the Hawariyun. Jumu'ah speaks of the blessing of knowledge and the etiquettes it demands. Do not be like the previous generations, referring to Bani Israel, that carried knowledge on their back, just like a donkey carries book on its back. The final verses talk about the ruling of Jumu'ah to leave off trade and answer the call to prayer. Once done, continue to seek the bounties of Allah. Munafiqun speaks of the evil traits of the hypocrites, such as deception, lying, enmity, hatred, preventing people from the truth, then warning the believers against their appearance and speech, speaking to the believers to have firmness in faith and allegiance to the Prophet that will eventually lead them to paradise. Taghabun talks about the day of judgment as a day of gain and loss. In it are the stories of the creation of man and the past stories, then speaking of a day of gathering when we find those who have great success and those who are in utter loss. The surah speaks of wealth and children as tests, concluding with encouraging the believer to do the best. Talaq speaks of the rulings of divorce, waiting period, providing provision for the divorced women, reminding over and over to the believer to be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not go over the boundaries. Tahrim starts referencing the incident where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited upon himself something that was halal just to make his spouses happy. The surah includes in it the verse of repentance with the promise of forgiveness. The last few verses give an example of intense kufr through the mention of Nuh and Lut alayhi salam's wives, and then the example of strength of faith in the most difficult circumstances through the story of Asiya, ending the surah with the mention of Maryam alayhi salam.
من أجبت دعاء نوح فانتصر وحملته في فلكك المشحون يا من أحال النار حول خليله روحا وريحانا